Hello, my name is Ian Watson, and I'm a Director Emeritus of the American Membrane Technology Association, or as some of us fondly call it, AMTA. AMTA is a technical organization that advocates the use of membrane technology for water treatment ranging from wastewater reclamation and reuse to seawater desalination and membrane filtration. The heart of the technology is the membrane and the systems that are assembled around it to produce a final unit operation. And about 3 years ago, the board of directors of AMTA decided that we should record the history of the technology through the eyes of the pioneers who blazed the trail. This is a continuation of our series, Chats with the Pioneers, in which we are recording for posterity, or perhaps longer, the efforts of the early pioneers in bringing membrane technology into the mainstream of water treatment. AMTA is posting these interviews on its website in the members-only section so that the next generation of engineers and scientists, and those of us that enjoy reminiscing about the good old days, can look at and listen to many of the people who were instrumental in bringing this technology to the worldwide position that it occupies today in providing safe, reliable water supplies to those in need. This series of 3 chats is with past employees of Polymetrics, one of the legacy OEMs in the business. This is group 28 of our series. I have with me today Mr. David Grunau, Mr. Chris Miller, and Mr. Dean Bedford, all of whom were occupied with Polymetrics in the early days of its history. And I'd like to ask Dave to give us a brief background of his education and experience.
Well, my education went to a eminent school called Concordia College in Bronxville, New York, known very little outside of New York. And then I went to a place called Valparaiso University because my father taught there and I got in for free. And then they were given free tours of a place called Korea. So I decided that maybe I should go and continue my education. So I went on and got a master's degree in Purdue. And then I went into the military and did a lot of secret stuff for 5 years. And then I got out and went to Stanford Business School. It was $1,000 a year at that time. And then I had an experience where I worked for the Bechtel Corporation. And I made the mistake after the first 6 months of telling them what I thought of the job, and they suggested that I didn't need to come back after my holiday. And so I took a round-the-world trip and then tried to figure out what to do. And I got into the ultra-pure water business, where we were making rinse water for, at that time, diodes. And it's little known that you need very pure water to rinse diodes. And then when chips evolved, they require even purer water. And that's when I got the brilliant idea that if you took a reverse osmosis membrane and ran city water through it, you'd end up with a pretty low mineral content, low bacteria content liquid. And then you'd take a mixed bed ion exchange and a ultraviolet and do a loop, and then you have ultra pure water, and that's how it all started. And then I went down to then Fluid Systems and said that I wanted to buy these membranes they were making. And I believe I bought the first membrane they ever sold because it was a research project. And they thought I was out of the mind. Here they're trying to get 90-something% rejection, and I was going to stick these on 50 part per million water from the Hetch Hetchy aqueduct. And they thought I was out of my mind trying to use membranes for that. And I said, well, I got a niche. Anyway, to make it very succinct, at the end of about 5 years, I think we had 38 of the semiconductor companies all using Polymetrics RO. The pioneer was Hewlett-Packard and IBM, which I believe started the same month. And then we evolved from there into the other thing we'll talk about later. I think we put in the first seawater plant in Bermuda, Bermuda Airport, and we put in the first million-gallon RO brackish water plant in Venice, Florida, And we had a lot of other firsts, but nothing real exciting. And apparently, we thought at that time, I mentioned that we thought a 100,000 gallon a day system was really big, and then we heard that a million gallons was really big, and then apparently the thing has got way beyond our imagination. But we were at the beginning. Thank you.
Chris, how about you?
I started in the business in 1963 when I was at Dartmouth College in our very first class in engineering design. They had divided the class up into groups of 12, just starting right out. And the problem that each group was supposed to solve was the problem of brackish water for the home. And that's when we first started, and our particular group was working on low pressure, reverse osmosis, and we came up, when we were trying to optimize for what pressure would be required for a home to produce about 200 gallons a day. In the optimization, it came out that it would be best to run just to treat 5 gallons a day for drinking water and do this with line pressure, 50 psi, so we didn't have to use a pump, because the pump was one of the biggest difficult areas for treating high pressures at low volume. And I continued to use that vehicle for the various engineering classes, and in 1966, when I was a senior, another student, Dean Spots, and myself were able to obtain a research and development contract from OSW and our friend Dr. Chana Prasapa, and because the dean of our school had connections in Washington, D.C., a fellow by the name of Dean Myron Tribus. And so Myron Tribus was a close personal friend of Dr. Surirajan, who was up in Ottawa at that time, the National Research Institute in Canada. And Dr. Surirajan became our consultant and mentor as we worked on the development of the membranes themselves, and the hardware associated with being able to put this into we call it a home unit. And in the course of our graduate studies, which took us through 1968, we had developed, which we believe it was the first continuous membrane casting and the first casting of membrane, integral casting on directly on a backing. We were actually using Eaton Dykman non-woven backing material, and we were using plate and frame, all plastics, and then worked a little bit to try to put them into a spiral configuration, which was a little bit of a challenge to two graduate students. But at the end of the day, we were able to make a water fountain, a bubbler with a 5-gallon tank, and our home unit inside it, and it was working and was put down in John Basapa's office down in Washington, D.C. And I was in ROTC and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in 1966, and then went to 2 years of graduate school, and they wouldn't let me go any further. And so I went into the Army into the Corps of Engineers for for 3 years, and then in 1972, I came back and went to work for Polymetrics and with David here.
Good, good. And so you and Dean were the ones that gave Dean the idea to start Osmonics, I guess, huh?
Yes.
Good. Dean, how about you?
Well, I'm the youngster here, I believe.
Yeah.
So I graduated in 1979 from the University of Wisconsin at Platteville, and I had a professor there, Harry Jevons, who at the time was saying the future in water was going to be pipe to pipe. And he said that the real key to all of it is development of a membrane barrier, something like that, before it'll ever get accepted. And he hinted to me that he had heard about some research going on out in Yuma, Arizona. And so I was able to land a job out at the Yuma Desalting Test Facility. In fact, I was replacing Bob Bergman, who had left and gone to Polymetrics. And I did about a year there at the very end of the testing. My main focus was on pretreatment, but we wrapped up the testing, and then I ran into all the people at Polymetrics out at the Nuisia conference out in Hawaii, where I was asked to present the findings from Yuma. I remember coming back and mentioning to them that I had been made a job offer from Polymetrics, and they said I should never sent you out there. But it worked out, and then I think I was in San Jose for all of 1 week, and then shipped off to the Bahamas. As I think, David, you're the one that coined the two ugly sisters. I had to take care of getting accepted. Was the plant Paradise Island, which I think at the time was probably the largest seawater plant. It had twin 250,000 gallon day units. And then after that, down in Culebra, Puerto Rico, the plant with Prasa. And from there, I really focused more on the system side of things. And I think then after Polymetrics, it was Aqua Design, and we started working really on the water sale. I think we kind of got the water sale agreements going on throughout the Caribbean. And they were very wildly successful, since so many of the plants that were built at the time didn't work. But in the meantime, working with Dick Hardipy, we had the development of the early stages of the work exchanger, the Diprex, which Chris spent a great deal of time on. And we put in and commissioned I think still to this day, the only differential area working energy recovery unit down in Grand Cayman that ran till, I believe, about 2007. We commissioned it in 1986, and that was a fun project to work on. And then from there, my family started occurring, and Katie and I felt it was time to head back to the eastern half of the U.S., and so we went to Florida, and that's when I started working with C.H. Toom Hill, following Bob Bergman once again. Bob encouraged me to come down, and we were down in Gainesville with C.H., working on the membrane projects. My specialty was seawater. I got involved in the Santa Barbara project. But I also had a chance to work some interesting projects, fluoride reduction in the Carolinas on hot water, on some of the brackish membranes down in Ian's part of the world, Boynton Beach and some of the others with a lot of those projects. But throughout all that, I got real antsy to get back into the actually getting dirty. And Chris came calling and convinced me that it was time to go back to work with Aqua Design. We went down to the Caribbean for 4 years in Tortola. And about that time is when Ionics acquired us. And I thought it was time to try a little something different. So that's when I started TSG, and I've been with TSG ever since.
Yeah. So Dave, tell me, you were in the Bay Area working on ultra pure water. Now,
Yes.
had you already started Polymetrics at that point?
No, I was working for a thing called CAW Engineering, standing for Charles A. Wendland, then owner, who happily was an alcoholic, and I was able to get a hold of the company and decided that that it was a good kind of business going. And at that time, we had no concept that the chip business would get to where it is now. We thought we'd stay as a little company servicing the semiconductor folks, and then we got into the water selling business, and then we got sort of eased out of that by a competitor who was found out how easy it was to build little RO plants, so he started building them. So then we had to do something more exciting. That's how we got into the seawater stuff, and we did that for a lot of years, and then we kind of moseyed into aqua design after polymetrics had gone away. And polymetrics today, I don't think even exists. We just discussed.
Don't know.
But it was a interesting idea to use reverse osmosis membranes for something totally unrelated to what they were originally being designed. Because these guys in Roga were trying to get 90-something% rejection. We didn't care what the rejection was. I do remember we paid $100 each for them, and they had a 1-year pro rata warranty on them.
So what year was Polymetrics actually incorporated?
67.
67.
Actually, it was you can't interview any of the, I made very bad choices for my original partners, several of which ended up incarcerated and were incompetent, and I was just lucky because a guy by the name of Tim Clark happened to be a genius mechanic person, and only because of his efforts were we able to keep the company going. This is long in the early days, and we squeaked a lot of years when we only, the semiconductor business was very cyclical, and unfortunately we got on the wrong side of the cycle and sold polymetrics to a company that ultimately, when it resold polymetrics for $8 million, I wish I got zero, and then subsequently that company went bankrupt in the biggest bankruptcy in the history of Santa Clara County. $152 million disappeared, which was big money in those days. And then both the principals ended up in jail. So we had a rather checkered career in my little business. And happily, Chris and these people showed up in a more happy era when things started taking off. And we actually were able to assemble really good people.
As I recall, Polymetrics was sold to TAG?
Well, Polymetrics was first sold, David and his friends sold the company to Technical Equities, which was the mini conglomerate in San Jose that eventually went bankrupt.
Another bad decision.
And then, but before that happened, Technical Equities sold or transferred 50% of the ownership of Polymetrics to Technique des Avant-Garde, TAG, which is owned by Akram Ojay. And for that, Akram Ojay put several millions of dollars into Polymetrics. And then there was a bit of a problem with the ownership. Couldn't agree on how the company should be run, and finally CGE, Compagnie Générale des Eaux, bought 100% of the company, and then subsequent to that, then Technical Equities went bankrupt.
Went bankrupt. Okay. So you started off as an ultra-pure water company, which I didn't know. I thought you'd actually started off in brackish water and then gone to ultra-pure. So when did you start working in brackish water?
About the time you showed up, wasn't it?
Yeah, about 19 72.
And one of the earliest plants you built, I think, was in Sarasota.
That was our first big
No,
one.
it was actually in Venice.
Yes.
Was Venice the first one?
Was
Venice
we
is the first
we sold a fair number of smaller plants, but the first major brackish water plant was Venice, and that was about 1 million gallons a day.
Right. And that was with DuPont B9 membranes.
Yes,
And you were one of the early licensees, I guess.
we were.
Yeah.
Another bad decision.
There weren't many
It's
options.
amazing with all these bad decisions. That
Why
you're
we're still
with us.
alive, I can't understand.
We're just very lucky we live right.
Well, I think I first met you, because I moved to Florida in 1977. And I first met you in the company of one George Dacey.
Oh,
You
yes.
remember George?
Our local agent, yes.
Yeah, and he was also the local rep for Infilco Degremont, or Infilco in those days, selling lime softeners.
Right. Yeah, what happened to George? Yeah.
Well, he died also. But he contacted me a couple of years after that and asked me if I'd go down and look at a couple of units in Cat K, which were polymetrics units. You remember doing those? They were 150,000 gallons a day each or something like that.
Oh, that would have been big. Those would have been W's, wouldn't they?
These were brackish units.
No,
Or
these were seawater.
Seawater.
Yeah.
It had been the W's.
They would have been
That
the-
was 25,000.
25,000.
As big as those ones.
That was we had developed a series called the W series, which could go up to, as Dean says, 25,000 gallons a day. And boy, I don't know, we probably sold
There were a lot
maybe
of them.
30 of those.
There were a lot
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah, they were, as I recall, there were like 3 permeators on it or something, like that, 3 B10s.
Up to 5.
Up to 5 B10s, yeah.
Of the 8-inch.
But it's funny because several years later, when membrane softening started to take hold in Florida, George was losing business as he
Yeah.
wasn't selling any more lime softeners.
I can imagine.
So
Oh, that's right.
he was trying to get Infilco to get into the membrane business, and they just refused to do it. So he was very upset with those of us who were in the consulting business who were pushing these membrane softeners. How did you win the project in Venice? Do you remember? I'm sure it was bid.
Oh, we must have had the low bid.
I think we spent a lot of time with the city council. I think that's when we had the engineer who didn't like, the engineer found out that he wasn't going to get a commission. They put a dotted line around the RO plant and said, by others. And engineers like to get percentages of things. And I can't remember his name, but he was very unhappy because we directly went to the city council members, which I subsequently did in Morro Bay, and talked to each council member separately. And I don't think that, I think we got a council, I don't remember much competition. I think we negotiated it. I don't remember multiple bids, but I'm a little fuzzy.
Yeah. But that was, and then Sarasota followed that.
Yeah.
But you did other work in Florida as well.
We, I think there was a Cape Coral. We did a few, but basically there was a lot of competition, and there wasn't much profit in the jobs in Florida after the initial ones. But at Venice, one of the things that we discovered is that there's hydrogen sulfide in some of the waters, and we were having terrible fouling problems at the beginning. And the problem is that in certain areas of the pipes there was effectively venturis where we were sucking air, and so the hydrogen sulfide was oxidizing, and we'd looked at ways to try to eliminate the hydrogen sulfide, and then came up with the technique was to keep it in the system and not allow it to oxidize. And by taking out the Venturi effects and making sure that there was no way for air to get into the pipes, the system worked quite well, and we used that same technique in other places, especially in seawater beach wells.
Now, when you started, Dean, you went off. You said you were there about a week and then took off.
Yeah, I had the 1 week orientation in polymetrics.
And you were working mostly on seawater plants in the Caribbean.
That's all I worked on was
Yeah.
seawater projects,
Yeah.
yes.
And you started off in the Bahamas, first one?
The Paradise Island, and this is, Merv Griffin, I think, still owned them at that time, wasn't it?
Yes.
And we had, the facility there, I believe, was to get the low bid because Dennis Casper was the consultant to Resorts International on the project, and Dennis and I knew each other from Yuma, and Dennis was a very good friend. And the problem we were having is that I think to get the low bid, they end up putting in triplex pumps when I think the original design called for quintuplex pumps, and the plant had a serious vibration problem. That was probably one of the more interesting part of my early assignments was, I said, looking at systems. The vibration was a huge problem back then with the seawater plants and metallurgy too. Fortunately, we did have hydrogen sulfide in the water at Paradise Island, so the corrosion wasn't as much of a problem, but it was more of just vibration. And we learned a lot of, remember I was sending you those reports?
Yeah.
You got into things like just people cutting tubing, leaving the neck into it, you induce vibration that would, we had one morning I showed up to the facility and you're talking about Eddie Ramsey. He goes, "Dean, you got to see this." He goes, "One of your B-10s is on the other side of the building." And one of the ferrules had cut loose on one of the gyrolocks and launched a B-10 probably 50 feet across the building.
I bet that was exciting.
That was, and especially it was one of the top ones, so it was, they weighed about 300 pounds trying to get it back up. It was tough. But yeah, that's almost all my work was on the seawater side with polymetrics.
So when did you start working on aqua design?
83.
83? And aqua design was started strictly to do water sail projects?
We did a job for you on
Well,
Rada.
That was DVD.
Yeah, the
DVT.
first project that we did was down in Bonaire, and it was a build, own, operate, and we became associated with Mitsui, and I digress a bit on the Mitsui connection, but our third partner, Mike Nelson, had purchased from Randy Truby cross-flow separations, which represented Torrey in the United States, and Torrey was associated very closely with Mitsui, and Mitsui wanted to sell membranes to us, and they financed the Bonaire project, and this was another short fuse project. It was the first build, own, operate that we did, and set us on a course for putting in plants. We had about 30 plants on 10 islands down in the Caribbean.
And you were responsible for taking care of them?
Yeah, we designed them,
Aqua
we
design.
built them, we owned them, or owned them in association with Mitsui, and operated them.
And then you had a water purchase agreement with
The,
whoever
with the
was
user.
buying the water.
Right,
Yeah, right.
hotels or
And
governments.
then, Dean, you went down, you moved to the Caribbean.
Yeah, I moved down in, I think it was 92. that specifically on to the British Virgin Islands, because there was we had I think, David, you had worked out a number of deals with the government there, and we were trying to get plants built, and we at the time, I think we were quite thin, if I recall, wasn't it? We were stretched really thin at the time. We had a lot of work going on.
You were talking about the work you were doing in the Caribbean and with Aqua Design. When did Polymetrics actually build its first seawater system?
It'd be in 1974 in Bermuda, at the Bermuda Airport, BAS, Bermuda Aviation Services.
And how big was that unit?
Boy, I think it was it had like perhaps 3 4-inch B10 membranes on it.
So it's quite small.
Yeah,
But
a couple
then
of thousand gallons.
shortly thereafter, you built a large one in Saudi Arabia,
in Yanbu.
in
yes.
Yanbu, and that was multi-million, wasn't it?
It was the first phase was 3,000 cubic meters. Second phase was 2,000, so a total of 5,000 cubic meters.
Yeah. And did you learn a lot from that experience in Yanbu?
Yeah, we learned an awful lot. None of us had ever been to Saudi Arabia before, and we're a bit naive in how business was done in Saudi Arabia. But so there was, commercial and cultural challenges, but also a challenge to build the plant. I think it was in 5.5 months, and there were huge penalties associated with it. And so the planning, the logistics were a challenge. But technically, we had intended to drill wells, and we hit 80,000 part per million water, and so we moved closer and closer. My theory was if we went closer to the Red Sea was only 40,000. It ought to be getting better, and finally, we had the drill rig with its wheels in the Red Sea, drilling down, and it was still in the 80,000 part per million range, and we were able to drill other wells near the site, and we were able to hit a seam of 55,000 part per million water. But as you can imagine, that was a real challenge.
I can imagine.
So we did learn a tremendous amount from that project, and we did get the thing going by midnight before the penalties kicked in.
Lucky for you.
Yes, in more ways than one.
Now, that was that with B10 membranes?
That was with B10 membranes.
B10s,
Yeah.
but you subsequently moved on and used other membranes in your systems. You talked about Torre. Did you use anybody else's?
We used Dow, cellulose triacetate hollow fibers, and we were quite impressed with the performance of those. So much so that we made a private label agreement with Dow, where we would purchase just the raw membrane elements without casing and without warranty, and we got a very advantageous price. But then Dow went to increase their production capacity with a high capacity production, and forgot how to make the membranes, and so that was the end of the cellulose triacetate and the end of what we had expected to be give us a real leg up in the industry. And then, as you know, Dow purchased Film Tech, and then we also used the Film Tech
You use Film Tech membranes as well.
and Torre membranes. The first Torre seawater membranes had fantastic performance, but they were hypersensitive to oxygen. So we had to put in things like vacuum degasifiers and other equipment that was pretty difficult.
Now, in those days, who was your competition?
WSA.
Water Services
Yeah.
of
America?
of
Yeah.
America.
Yeah, Gordon Lightner's company.
Yes. And in fact, later on, we took over one of Gordon's plants on St. Martin.
Yeah, we lost a bid for water. That's how it all started in the Caribbean, as I was renting a boat from the moorings and saw this tug dragging a big glob behind it. Turned out with the water supply, the desalinators had gone out on the island, and the Dutch weren't going to buy new ones, and they were paying $3.50 a cubic meter. So I went and saw the manager of the thing. I said, "Hey, we'll give it to you 3.25." And we had a big to-do. It got very confusing, and we got outfoxed by Aquachem, and they got the original contract. And
WSA.
WSA, yes. And they got the original contract, and happily, their technical wasn't as good as their sales ability, and the unit failed. And we ended up buying them out and replacing it, and stayed there for a lot of years. So we started with the bits and pieces of what was left over by Gordon Lightner.
You did some early work on energy recovery as well.
Right,
And,
at Polymetrics.
At Polymetrics,
We
right.
got a contract from what was then OWRT to work on a pressure exchange, flow work exchangers now called. And actually the concept had been brought to Polymetrics by Bill Andrews. And it was an original idea of his, but somebody actually had patented this the device, and we were able to make a two-cylinder out of about a B10 casings that we then
B10 shells.
V10 shells that we then didn't work out so well, and then we used aluminum bronze about the same size. But we eventually put that into to BAS in Bermuda, and so I believe that was the first working flow work exchanger. And then,
And what year was that? Do you remember?
this would have been probably 78, maybe something like that. And then when we got the project in Bonaire, we two engineers that were working with us, Walter Hayden and Dick Hardapy, that you might know, and they convinced me that we can do this on a big scale. And so we took the full code line, the old code line vessels, the ones that were thicker, and made a two-cylinder flow work exchanger. And because it was a build own operate, the customer had no say in what we were installing, so we could take the technical risk of trying something new. And again, the problem was the project was really on a short fuse, and Dick Hardapy and Walt Hayden, finally got this thing going. We had it in the back of the shop, 2 cycles, good, go, and then we worked out the problems later on when it got installed, and we built several variations of the energy recovery. One was on the next one that we built was on Grand Cayman at Treasure Island, where we were using a differential area on either side of the piston by having a rod extending through the end cap, and so I mean it looked like a device out of the Smithsonian from the last century, but I believe that was the most efficient energy recovery system ever built. I believe, and then we went on to use a 3-cylinder energy recovery at
St. Martin, was
at
it? GB.
at GB, and then at the plant there at Paradise at Virgin Gorda,
Hanson Bay.
Hanson Bay,
Put it in.
and then a very large one. I believe we were using 18 or 20-inch vessels, maybe 30 feet long, at in Curacao. One of the interesting ones is that we were using a completely passive energy recovery system in St. Martin because we had different areas of membrane that had different pressure requirements, and so we had a free-floating piston that didn't require the valves, basically the check valves, and our I would say not near, but genius electrical engineer assured us that the piston would come down and just kiss the end of the end cap. Well, that kiss turned into a frantic embrace and just about slammed this thing to pieces. But in all of this, we're learning about what to do. You know, the problems when you get out in the field and you have to make the thing run, the problems become manifest and they have to be solved. And it isn't any great conceptual part, but it's solving a lot of little problems. And as Dean indicated, you know, there's corrosion problems, vibration problems, you know, things that don't show up on a conceptual diagram. You know, what do you do with the seals, for example, on that differential piston?
Now you did a what I believe was the first seawater plant in California at Morro Bay.
We had some. I would say it's the first commercial one that I know of, but I think that there were that Fluid Systems had put in, you know, test units.
Oh yeah.
Little units out on
Right.
the islands, but no, we had the first real one. It lasted for a couple of years until state water came in and trumped it.
But it's still there, I think.
No, I thought they sold it. I'm going through there next week. I'll check.
I don't know, but a few years ago, I know that Boyle Engineering was engaged to do some work there.
Could very well be. Could very well be. But that was an interesting project. We thought at the time, and this would have been in the early 90s, that here we had an opportunity to do a project in the United States where they spoke English, same time zone, place where we could get, you know, good qualified subcontractors, and you know, in our ego we thought that, you know, we've dealt with the world-class difficult places and world-class difficult people. This was going to be a piece of cake, and we were completely unprepared for the difficulty of doing business in California.
In California.
The ink wasn't even dried when and the city got sued, and we were named as a co-defendant, and we almost lost the company on with legal fees, and at the end we stopped even showing up to court, because if we kept showing up to court, we were going to go broke for sure. But we were completely unprepared for the regulatory and legal problems of dealing in California.
So Dean, when did you actually leave Polymetrics?
I would say it was probably about 84. Yeah, it must have been right around 84. I went to work with Hob McPherson for a year at Process Scientific.
Oh, yeah.
And I worked with Hob for a better part of a year. And then, and I think it was 1986, once again I was talking with Chris and Mike, and they had just signed the deal for the Treasure Island facility in Grand Cayman. And it was very fascinating, so I jumped ship and went to work with them. Loved it. It was a great assignment. That was a really good assignment. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Dave? When did you finally leave Polymetrics?
We kind of morphed into Aqua Design.
Right.
The exact date is kind of fuzzy. Because I
Just
left.
like the Big Tens. It was 1983, actually, exactly.
And then you were still at Polymetrics, though.
No, we left at the same.
Oh, you
David and I
all left at the same time.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
I can remember coming home. I was down in Culebra, and I had flown back, and I went into Timothy Drive, and everybody's packing boxes. Like, what's going on? And nobody would talk to me because they said, "You're being retained. We've all been let go." It was a bad day. I remember you guys. I think I'd heard from you in Miami. You told me that you'd resigned. That was a really.
That must have been a shock.
That was a difficult
Show
day.
up and everybody's packing up to leave.
Well, I said I'd been given a hint because we had to fly through Miami, and I'd called in, and Chris said, "Yeah, I resigned today." I think Jim Slay had done the same, didn't he? Or Jimmy resigned a little before you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when
He was
Jim
with Corita, I think.
he left to go to Korea, didn't he?
You'll have to ask Jim.
Yeah, have
We'll
to
ask Jim
that one.
Yeah.
But that's when you kind of felt that the wheels were kind of falling off. It was a tough time.
Yeah. In 1967, or whatever it was, if you'd had 20/20 foresight, would you have done what you did, Mr. Grunau? Or would you have done it differently?
Well, I done it differently. I would have done a better job of sourcing my partners in the first round. Having said that, I really lucked up and got this lot later, so life became, really I was technically the president a lot, but really I was the peddler. These guys dealt with the matters you're talking about, and I was out pounding on doors in Morro Bay and those kind of places, and learned a lot about Saudi Arabia, a place that I don't need to go back anymore to. Although I was in the Middle East at the time when there weren't suicide bombers and you could walk right into an embassy and wave at the guard and walk in and talk to the ambassador. I mean, we were there at a very mellow time.
Did you have any regrets about going into the membrane technology business?
Oh, no. I mean, I guess the one thing of having foresight, we never realized that the business for rinsing, that the chip business was going where it is today. I mean, we were, IBM was one of the few customers with chips, and there wasn't really a lot going on. So we never envisioned a large company. We were just a local guy. Yeah. And little do we know it was going to get as big as it get. And of course, little do we know that the RO industry would get to where it is today. Apparently, we're putting $500 million plants in, and we thought 1 million was a big deal. So it's changed a lot. But we kept, we survived many ups and downs, and ended up, we sold the company, I thought, at a at the right time, at a fair price, and I was older than the rest of the people. I didn't recognize that till much later. I was 15 years older than they were.
Never
So I was retired and I'm still working. And Chris went on and did a really bang-up job of Trinidad after I left Ionics. After they didn't write me a check one month, and then sent me an email. They sent me my 401k check, and that was, I guess I figured I wasn't working there anymore.
Well, Chris, you did work on RO in college.
Yes.
So, I mean, that was sort of, the die was cursed.
Yeah, that was 50 years ago.
Don't remind me. But dude, looking back, do you have any regrets about taking that course? I mean, you could have done biological wastewater treatment, for example.
I can't imagine a more exciting, rewarding career. I mean, it's been absolutely exceeded all of my expectations, and I mean, part of it is that, I mean, you hear some of the stories here that of things that didn't go so well, but we were incredibly fortunate. I mean, a lot of people were difficult to deal with, but there's also an awful lot of people that went out of their way to help us out. And although there was, I would say, you know, looking back on it, we took some incredible risks, probably unwarranted risks, and we're really fortunate that everything worked out. And but the people that we're working with, and the fun factor of actually being able to make decisions, like on this project in Yamba, was probably the largest project that I could have done as an individual, and being able to have your hands on everything. And we were given a free hand, absolute free hand, by the management of Polymetrics, and also just the personal fun, like down in being able to go down to the BVI where Dean was, and I can remember we'd gone out to some project and was working there most of the afternoon into the evening, and riding in the back of Dean's Mazda pickup truck, drinking beer in the evening, and you know, and
In paradise.
in paradise. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. So, and the people we were working with were just, we really had a great group of folks. It was just a lot of fun. And so, you know, maybe these are risks that weren't, that maybe we shouldn't have taken, but at the end of the day, can't imagine it being any better.
Yeah. How about you, Dean?
Oh, I wouldn't change it at all. Although I have to say, I missed working with all the people out here in California. So one thing that Polymetrics had was an incredible brain trust. I mean, just amazing, the skill sets we had in the company. And it was the same with Aqua Design. We literally
All the same folks.
a lot of it was, well, oh yeah, a lot of it was. I mean, and you'll talk to more tomorrow. But working with Walt Hayden, you know, I was fortunate even at TSG when Walt still consulted. I had a chance to work with Walt for probably another 4 or 5 years on projects. But no, I wouldn't change it whatsoever. Like Chris said, the people we've met and the places we've been And we've had some great times. And there's been plenty of hard times, but
Well, you must have liked it because you're still doing it.
I don't know what else to do. That's the problem.
But
No, I do
but
enjoy it. I do enjoy it.
I-
I do.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming this evening and doing this chat for us. And I'll never forget one thing that Dave told me one time years and years and years ago. He said, we're all in the RO business, and we're all Dame Bramaged. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.